So if we could give the deputy mayor just a couple of minutes.
You don't mind it? No. Okay.
Good. Good.
Thank you, sir. Matt, before we start, can I just have a minute to say a few words?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. My name is Shoaib Rahim. I'm Deputy Mayor of Kabul. I'd like to say hello and good morning to you all. It's very good to be speaking again, especially to you, Teresa and Matt. I think after we signed the sister city partnership between Kabul and Kansas City, this is the first people-to-people exchange that we had planned on, and I'm very glad that we've picked debaters to make this exchange. So it's a good exchange of ideas, and we get to know each other. From our side here, the American University of Afghanistan's debate club is a pretty active club. We have the club's advisor, Steve, also here with us. He'll be introducing himself as well. Ali Juma, who's an alumni of the club and the university, he will be judging. And after introductory remarks, I will be asking permission to leave, and the team here will continue. I think they had prepped as government for the motion, but they just now realized that your team has also prepped as government. So we're just going to flip as opposition, and I think my team will do fine, hopefully. Fingers crossed. But other than that, I'm very excited that we've finally started this. I hope the technical difficulties and audio quality will not affect the debate too much. And I hope that we will be able to continue such exchanges between the fine people of Afghanistan and Kabul with Kansas. That's all I had to say. So we can start.
Okay, fantastic. As long as everyone can hear me okay, before I begin, I have a couple of thank yous that I'd like to make. First, I want to thank the Kansas City Kabul Sister City Committee for initiating this debate, especially Rick Burns, who kept pushing it forward. I want to thank Councilwoman Lohr for opening the event today. I want to thank the administration at all the universities involved for supporting debate teams and this debate. Thanks to Chancellor Agrawal, Dean Vaught, and thanks to the Comm Studies Department, especially our chair, Caitlin Horseman, and Kevin Mullen in the Media Lab for last-minute tech support. Thanks to Debate Kansas City. Thanks to the faculties locally and their personnel. I also want to thank the audience for being here, as well as our esteemed judges, our opponents, and my colleagues. Now, if everyone is ready, I will begin with the first affirmative speech. This House proudly believes that free trade is essential to peace. The first affirmative speech will answer two questions relevant to our debate. First, what is the relationship between free trade and peace? Second, what is the alternative to international free trade? These will be our guiding principles for discussion, and we are confident that the answers to both will encourage you to vote up the motion. Let's begin with a few definitions to outline our discussion today. First, we'll define free trade similarly to award-winning reporter Adam Barone as policy intended to eliminate discrimination against imports and exports. Free trade is the opposite of trade protectionism. It is also important to note that a free trade policy may be the absence of any trade policies, so a government doesn't necessarily need to take a specific action to promote free trade. Second, we'll define peace from Oxford Dictionary as a state or period in which there is no war or a war has ended. Third and finally, essential simply means extremely important as per Cambridge Dictionary. Our first point of contention is that unequivocally free trade reduces conflict. There are several metrics or standards we can use to evaluate this claim. Subpoint A, free trade decreases the likelihood of conflict. Eric Gartsky and Quan Lee, professors at the University of California, San Diego, and Texas A&M, robustly analyzed the sum of data on the topic and noted that most quantitative studies report that trade correlates with a reduction in interstate militarized disputes. It is particularly important to use specific number-based evidence for this discussion. They explained that research on interdependence and conflict is methodologically sophisticated and offers important statistical support for the intuition that interstate economic linkages promote peace. While there will be counterexamples to even the most prominent causal relationships, it's important to note that as a historical rule, the research robustly concludes that free trade reduces the probability of conflict. So why is that the case? There are several explanations for why international cooperation in the form of free trade has been an effective strategy for reducing war. The first reason is that international free trade facilitates economic interdependence. Gartsky and Lee explain that international transactions have a direct impact on the likelihood of peace because economic interests overcome the passion for war or conquest. Primarily, this is because states have increased opportunity costs to inciting conflict. Nations have to analyze the traditional negative consequences of starting a war, such as loss of life and international repercussions. But a world of free trade imposes another cost, the loss of capital and economic stagnation. As the saying goes, talk is cheap, and free trade policies incentivize nations to cooperate peacefully and in a manner that doesn't threaten their economic interests. To some degree, nationalist power politics are inevitable. But trade independence acts as a dampener for war efforts, reducing the incentives to fight and increasing the negative consequences of doing so. The second explanation revolves around political flexibility. States engaging in free trade benefit politically from an increasingly flexible array of options for international diplomacy that don't involve the use of force. For instance, states are capable of achieving their political goals through market forces as opposed to more aggressive tactics. When addressing domestic issues like poverty, free trade gives nations the tools of international markets to increase growth and increase economic security. Douglas Irwin with Dartmouth College explains that reducing trade barriers has brought about striking improvements in economic performance. This has improved socioeconomic outcomes like the reduction of poverty, malnutrition, and infant mortality. Take East Asia, for example. Since the mid-1970s, growth in exports has contributed to lifting more than 400 million people out of poverty. In Vietnam and Uganda, access to export markets have generated unprecedented declines in rural poverty. In this way, free trade represents a solution to the root causes of conflict. When nations lack resources and live in vast economic precarity, they're more likely to adopt more forceful solutions to attain wealth and can be more easily manipulated by others to do so. Free trade gives political leaders the flexibility to address domestic concerns more peacefully and effective. Subpoint B, free trade is an essential peace-building tactic after conflict. The arguments I've discussed above not only apply to preventing conflict in the first place, but they also contribute to effective peace after war. Miriam Sapiro, visiting fellow in the Global Economy and Development Program, notes the relationship between economic security and preventing conflict. Citing numerous historical examples, Sapiro explains how economic cooperation has been an effective centerpiece of post-war rehabilitation. After World War II, the Marshall Plan took the war-torn nations of Germany, Italy, and Japan and established unprecedented growth by removing trade restrictions. This revival of free trade across the world is responsible for the relative peace experienced in Europe and East Asia for the last several decades. Sapiro goes on to explain that when people have opportunities for themselves and their children, the result was better governance, increased respect for human rights, and lower levels of conflict. International free trade has historically provided those opportunities and continues to do so into the 21st century. Our second point of contention is that the alternatives to free trade are much worse. Our opponents are tasked not only with criticizing free trade, but rather proving to you that there is a viable alternative capable of reducing conflict and providing economic opportunity. We suspect this will be a difficult task. A world without free trade is rife with protectionism and localized trading blocs between small groups of countries. Secretary General of the UN Conference on Trade and Development, Supachai Panich-Pakdi, writes that almost none of the trade issues facing major economic powers would be easier to solve unilaterally, bilaterally, or regionally. He asks, what sense does it make to negotiate e-commerce rules bilaterally? Or why would we address agricultural subsidies in a regional agreement? Aside from being ineffective, there is a great deal of harm to be caused by a more regional approach. These policies exclude others through their preferential basis, fragmenting global trade and distorting the world economy. They carve international markets into bits and pieces, often leaving less economically developed regions to fend for themselves. It was exactly this type of segmented global economy that made early 20th century Europe such a dangerous place. And thankfully, the establishment of free trade policies after World War II has rectified many of these concerns. Fundamentally, nations need economic trade for resources, growth, and sustainability. Countries around the world then are left with a choice. Multilateral free trade creates independence and peace, while closed-minded protectionism and localized trade deals foster resentment and encourage conflict. We proudly believe that free trade is essential to peace because of the robust empirical data and broad historical support for our side of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the speaker. Now I'd like to call upon the second speaker, the leader of opposition, to begin the case on the opposition side of the House. Let us know if you cannot hear us clearly.
Okay, so we will begin with the motion which says that free trade can improve. It can be essential for the peace process or for peace in countries. What we are here focusing is on developing countries. What will be the impact of this on developing countries? But the Prime Minister had no clear figures or a explanation on how would it actually help the development of the economy of the developing countries. So what we are going to, they also didn't tackle the issue of the misuse of free trade. Among the countries, especially in developing countries, the free trade can be misused. We have the example of China, which had the free trade, which had trade with the United States, and they misused the process. And what they did is they manipulated the currency and they manipulated some also the products. So we believe, as the opposition, that free trade cannot only direct to the cannot only lead us to peace, but it also can some point in time result to dispute between the states. With the example of United States and China is an example of how this free trade could put those countries in a situation where right now both states are in conflict and they cannot reach a conclusion. So coming to our own arguments, we believe that especially in developing countries, free trade should not be implemented, and which cannot only lead to the peace, but also it can also result to the damage or even to the damage of the economy of those countries. So what do we mean by this? That economy of developing countries will never get better. If developing countries is producing a lot of products and it's selling back to the countries, neighboring countries, or another developing countries, if they don't put any sanctions or tariffs, their own products will not be sold or will not be well received by the citizens of that country. And instead, they will focus on the products that are coming from other countries because those products that are coming from other countries will be cheaper for the citizens, and because they will not have any tariffs on them. The second argument is that it's unfair for the developing countries because developed countries have already gone through this process. They have already gone through a process of putting tariffs on the states and asking this and buying the. They have already sold their products in the developed countries with high price, and at the end, the country who has produced those products have already explored and boost their economy, while it's unfair for the economy of the developing countries. Also, coming to the issue of misuse of states with free trade. If we bring this example in developing countries, the countries who are more powerful, who are a little bit more powerful than the other or the neighborhood country, they will try to they will try to export their products in the developing countries, and that country who is receiving the products does not have the facilities, does not have the factories and all those stuff. That's why they will not be able to compete the other country. And also that the second country who is exporting can misuse the process. What they will do is they will put subsidies. They will put subsidies on the products of the host country, the country that is importing. And at the end of the day, the people will less likely show interest to the products that are coming from that country, which we have the example in our country currently in Afghanistan, where people do not even give value to the product of their own country. And what they do is they focus on the products that are coming from other countries, especially the neighborhood countries. So with that being said, we are very proud to oppose this motion, which will not, free trade will not only damage the process, will not only lead to the conflict between states, but it also decreases the economic growth of a state. Thank you so much.
I thank the leader of opposition for her speech. And now I'd like to call upon the Deputy Prime Minister from the government side to extend the debate.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
First, I would like to begin by addressing our opponent's case's points. First, when they talk about the US and China in conflict because of free trade, they do not explain what conflict is happening or how that is a direct result of free trade. Additionally, we would argue that the current president of the United States has been implementing more protectionist policies, whereas we support free trade, which is the opposite of protectionist policies. So any current changes in administration is exactly due to the kind of protectionist policy that we do not support. Additionally, on their argument about free trade hurting developing countries, first, it is not free trade's fault that people within a country value imports more than domestically produced goods. And secondly, the solution to not having or to free trade possibly leaving developing countries behind is not to exclude them entirely from international markets through protectionist policies. Free trade allows for countries to have the ability to export their goods to other countries and have access to more technologically advanced and a greater variety of goods. I think we need to look especially on the fact on what protectionism means. As an alternative to free trade, it not only increases costs to consumers, creates inefficiencies, but also leads to economic nationalism. My first subpoint talks about how protectionism raises the costs for consumers. Robert Z. Lawrence and Robert E. Leeton in the Harvard Business Review analyzed the cost of protectionist policy and stated that in 1984, American consumers paid an estimated $53 billion in higher prices because of the import restrictions levied that year. In the agricultural industry, protectionist policies make developing countries lose about $24 billion a year in lost income, which is exactly the kind of policies that would happen if we don't support free trade, and it would hurt developing countries just as much or more than free trade would. When countries set tariffs on imported goods, consumers not only have to pay more for these goods, but they do not have the same variety of goods or technologically advanced goods available. Additionally, if the costs are raised on one good, it affects the price of every good that also uses that resource. So for example, if the price of wheat goes up, that will increase the prices for sandwiches, cereal, Pop-Tarts, and my favorite, pasta. Subpoint B, protectionism also creates inefficiency. David Fossiri, Swanari Ahmed Hanan, Jonathan D. Austri, and Andrew Rose, in their article for the Center for Economic Policy Research, studied the impact of protectionist policies from a macroeconomic perspective, analyzing the impact of tariffs on real GDP, productivity, unemployment rate, and inequality. From their research, they determined that the wasteful effects of protectionism lead to a meaningful reduction in efficiency with which labor is used and thus output. When domestic producers do not face competition from international producers due to trade restriction, they have no incentive to innovate or become more efficient. These authors explain that tariffs encourage the deflection of trade to inefficient producers and smuggling to evade the tariffs. Such distortions reduce productivity, income, and welfare. Another macroeconomic problem that results from protectionism is called deadweight loss. To explain, I'll use an example. Say that I make pencils and Nathan makes pens. In a world of free trade, I will trade my 2 pencils for one of Nathan's pens, and we both will have something that we didn't make on our own, which means we have more resources than when we started. We have more wealth. However, in a world of protectionism, I keep all my pencils, Nathan keeps all his pens, neither of us get what we want, and we have less resources than if we traded. That difference in value just disappears, and that's what's called deadweight loss. And in a world where everyone is trading in lots of different industries, that deadweight loss can be substantial and greatly affects incomes in both importing and exporting countries. Therefore, it is of massive importance to not leave opportunities to make money on the table by encouraging protectionist policies. My last subpoint is that protectionism causes economic nationalism. Protectionism has economic consequences, but more concerning are the political implications. Luca Farini, advisor for the European Union Energy Initiative and project manager for the German Development Corporation in West Africa, explains that price increases that come from protectionism are spread out amongst all consumers, so the individual costs per person are low. However, protectionist policies have large benefits for specific industries within a country. Thus, industries are more likely to not only support protectionist policies, but to make large campaign contributions and lobby their politicians in order to implement these changes. He argues that individuals are rarely aware of the fact that the prices they face are inflated by protectionist measures, and this lack of awareness substantially erodes their power to counter private industrial interests. This is especially problematic when protected industries are the ones that make household goods, because a 10% increase in the price of bread will hit a poor family much harder than a family which is better off. Politicians support protectionist policies despite its cost to society and rationalize it by explaining that it is necessary for a sense of national purpose or national security, rather than admitting it benefits private industries more than society. When national purpose justifies economic policy, protectionism leads to isolationist foreign policy. Hadi Soastro, the executive director and senior economist at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, argues that additional protection now would undercut progress made to date and seriously threaten to diminish, if not destroy, growth prospects going forward. Because once a few systemically important countries implement protectionist policies, other countries will find the political pressures to do the same thing irresistible and will retaliate. The impacts of these retaliatory trade policies include reduced demand for imports, which reduces incomes for the import producing country, and higher prices for the import receiving country. Much like on a micro level, these countries most affected by more protectionism would be the developing countries that have not shifted to open trade policies. Their prospects, even if they did shift, would be greatly reduced, meaning that if a developing country wants to have economic growth, in a world of protectionism, there is no one that is willing to trade with them and receive their goods, which means they have no way to continue to grow. When there are few opportunities for economic growth, we can see from history that economic nationalism can become military nationalism and increase the likelihood for conflict. An important historical example to look at is the lead up to World War II. Protectionist policies, including cessation of international loaning and the recall of all previous loans after the onset of the Great Depression, led to economic collapse throughout Europe, especially Germany. Matthew Johnson, macroeconomist at St. Stephen's in New Brunswick, explains that deteriorating economic conditions in Germany helped the Nazi Party grow from being a relatively small fringe group to being the nation's largest political party. Protectionism increases isolationism and encourages leaders to blame other countries for their economic woes, which we have further extended from our first speech. So I would posit to the negative team that if it's not free trade, what else? Because protectionism is only worse for developing countries and the world.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for her speech. 7 minutes. Yeah, speaking for 7 minutes. Yeah. I will be speaking for 5 minutes. You have time because now I'd like to call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue the debate.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Now, first off, I'd like to say that let me make this clear. We are not against trading. We are not going against trading. And the opposition seems to make it as though we completely want to isolate our country or any other country or every nation, and we want to completely ban trading altogether. We've been doing this since we were hunters and foragers, and we'll continue doing this, and we support this. We're not against trading. Mm-hmm. So the idea of date with loss, that somehow that I got a pencil in the example of the other house, and suddenly I wouldn't be able to trade with the people, that's completely not true, because we go for trading. We want trading. We want to have a certain regulation that would benefit people who are less fortunate, who have been less fortunate in history, to actually gain economical prosperity in their countries and in their nations. First off, let's come to some of the rebuttals. It's hurting developing countries. And their rebuttal to this idea that it's hurting developing countries is that it's not people's fault that they're not actually liking their own products. Of course, it's not people's fault. But do you agree that it's the government's job to make it more appealing, to make the products more appealing, to make it prosper more in the economy, so that in the end, it will have a reciprocal effect and it will come down and then help the people, the poor people, the people who you said that it's not their fault. So we are helping the people. Also, it allows developing countries to export. They made an argument that, it's a free trade. You can go and export. Well, it's such a shame that we don't have the facilities and the advancement of and the relationship of trading agreements to do that as good as some other countries. So there's a big problem there. It's not like we're on all equal ground. So that doesn't make sense to me. Other one is that people will have to pay more, and there will be less diversity of product. Let's tackle the pay more. We're only having protectionist ideas, and we're only gonna put tariffs and taxes on the products that we know that we can actually provide inside our country for our own citizens. So therefore, they will not be paying more. They will just be buying our own products instead of somebody else's products, which is a good thing for our own economy. So we will have a substitution. We will substitute the products of our own country instead of the other countries. And it's a good for the people. So the other idea is that it will be good for competition, that we will have competition of sorts, and we strive on competition. Now, I want to say that, yes, we do want competition, but the problem is, competition, do you want it to be fair or unfair? Do you want it to have a company who has been in another country and has been prospering for hundreds of years compete with a company that has just been established 1 year and it's one of the poorest countries in the world? Is that a fair competition between us? I would say that is not. And it will continue to hurt the economy of these countries and the companies, and it will actually demotivate people to create new companies, because they know that they're not going to prosper. And they came up with the idea of nationalism that somehow promotes nationalism, that it will be human chauvinism at the end, that everybody will go back to tribalism areas. And I would say that, and they brought the example of World War II. In the whole debate, I imagine there's a lot of statistics and not much rationality from the other side of the house, in my opinion. But the idea of having World War just for the sake of economical disparity is completely bogus and wrong. Yes, that was a sector, a part of it, but that was not only the part of it. It was philosophy, it was ideologies, it was the lack of education, it was the shift that we were going through as the whole planet was shifting in a different direction. That's actually one of the main causes of World War, not just economical disparity. Having said that, I would like to come to some of my own arguments of why we think this is a bad thing to implement. First off, it's not going to be enough. Like I mentioned in the example of World War, economy is not everything. It will not be enough for sustainable peace. Why? Because we believe that economies depend on countries and on each administration, and administration change over time. So therefore, economies are fragile, frail, and they're feeble. And they're likely to change overnight, actually. And we've seen this in the example of the United States. You know, it was all blueberries and good things until Donald Trump came, and now it's just all out war on the trade, right? So economies can shift dramatically within just 1 year. So do we want to have a peace agreement based on something that is so fragile, that's so changeable? I don't think so. So what would be the alternative? We need to have political agreements, and we understood this after the World War, and that's why we created UN. UN is not an economic-centered organization. It is based on consensus and politics. We think, therefore, that basing something on an agreement, on an economic agreement that hurts the country, and it's not a long-term agreement for peace, therefore, there will be a great loss for the countries, for each of the countries. The other argument is that it will be the more developed countries, as a result of the free trade agreement, and as a result that they have more facilities for export, and therefore they will control most of the markets, they will have more grip on developing countries. Therefore, they will be controlling developing countries. So we're actually giving the keys to each of these countries. If you're saying about diplomatic relationships between people, think of how a newly created, a developing country such as Afghanistan, which has not established its roots in any part of our economic institutions. Think of how devastating it would be if a country like the United States came and said, well, we're not going to import anything back to your country. Now we're not going to give you anything else. So now, and by the way, your exports, they're not going to come to our country now. So even though 90% of your country was actually dependent on our money that we were giving to you guys as a result of your imports, now we're not going to do this. So we think this is wrong, feeble, and childish. Thank you very much.
I thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for his speech. Now I'd like to call upon the government whip to conclude the debate on the government bench.
You all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. We have finally reached the last affirmative speech. This is the end game. And much like a movie I'm going to see this weekend, my opponents represent an end game we don't want to become reality. Thanos is an enemy of free trade. He wants to eliminate the choice we have as people to organize, act, and live how we would like to. My opponents and Thanos both believe the world needs harsh rules. Rules about how many people can exist on Earth, rules about who those people can trade with, and rules about what kind of products and people you get to interact with. When you're deciding who wins this debate, you must ask yourself, do I want more rules? You are surrounded by rules, your parents, teachers, and older siblings constantly telling you what you can and can't do. You aren't allowed to go and see your friend. You aren't allowed to choose what you eat for lunch, and you aren't allowed to read what you want, think what you want, and do what you want. Even right now, as you're sitting in your chairs, you could get up and leave, but you won't because the rules have forbidden it. Rules have consequences. And just like Spider-Man, the negative arguments don't make me feel so good. The negative team wants you to believe that all these rules shouldn't be limited to middle school. They want you to believe that we should continue to shackle ourselves to more and more rules for the rest of our lives. Sadly for them, my teammates and I are the Avengers, and they may be winning the Infinity War, but in free trade, we will be victorious. Now, this debate may seem rather confusing up to this point. Conversations about free trade, what trade is, protectionism, interstate conflict all seem abstract and don't apply to your lives much. You may be thinking, this debate is nice, but for what? Let me put it like this. Without free trade, you would never have had the opportunity to listen to Drake. You wouldn't know what God's plan is. You would never have been able to ask Kiki if she loved you or gotten that last one dance because Drake is from Canada and not the United States. Some of you may have heard the news. 21 Savage is from London, not the United States. Negative teens policies have a lot of consequences. You should make sure to be careful because Cardi B is from Puerto Rico and J. Cole was born in 1985 in Germany. Think of the world we would live in without the culture, the music, and the people from all over the world. These things have been made possible by free trade, open borders, and our position, and that you should allow people to travel, buy, and see what you want. There are three main arguments being forwarded by the negative team. The first is that Donald Trump is a warmonger and that the United States is currently going into a space of war because of free trade. We have answered this argument and actually proven why it is a benefit of our position. Donald Trump is not an advocate of free trade. Donald Trump is an advocate of protectionism. He wants to limit and build walls between our country and other countries. He wants to enact tariffs and sanctions against other countries, which are all things that we advocate are not free trade and not things that we think should be policies that should be pursued in the future. Now, the second argument that they're making is that free trade will harm developing countries. But we have had a pretty good answer from the beginning of this debate. Even if countries prefer imported goods to domestic goods, that is only temporary. The notion that eventually exposure to technology and products abroad will make domestic products better. For example, we will talk about Japan. Japan was once dominated by American products post-World War II, but now more people use Samsung phones than iPhones. And Samsung is a Japanese company. The Japanese bought US cars until Toyota learned how to make cars that were better than American cars. Our argument is simple, that an exposure to exported and imported products from countries like the United States will make people in countries like Afghanistan learn how to make products better so that in the future, those people will prefer those domestic products as opposed to products from the United States. Now, they talk a lot about motivation, which is their third argument. But why would it be motivating for a country and its people to develop better products if it is guaranteed that those domestic products will be the only option for purchase by their people? Why would people in Afghanistan be motivated to make better cars if they knew they never had to compete with Toyota, they never had to compete with Ford, or any of the other countries and companies making cars abroad? That would only stimulate them to be stagnant and use the cheapest parts that they could to maximize profit in those instances. Now, at the beginning of this debate, we posed two questions. What is the relationship of free trade to peace? But I want us to pause and ask a much deeper question. What is peace without freedom? To the negative team, China may be peaceful because they aren't in any wars or military conflicts, but at the same time, they can't even freely search the internet, use Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or even read what they want to. This begs the question, can we truly have interstate peace when our own countries are at war with freedom? The second question we posed the negative team was, if they are so disillusioned with free trade, then what is their alternative? We could be here for hours while they tell you about the problems that exist in the world, the complications of trade policies, the bad trade deals, but that only ignores the true question we all must be asking. What is the alternative to freedom? And if there is a world where we strive to be less free than we are today, is that a world we should work towards? Is that a world that you want to live in? My opponent's inability to ask the deeper questions will be their downfall. Their next and final speech will likely be them reiterating statistics, events, and technicalities, but those technicalities will never come to terms with the deeper questions at the core of these issues that too often go unasked and unanswered. Ask yourself this: why do countries go to war? This ultimately forces you to ask the question, why do countries take any course of action? The answer is simple. Countries act the way they do to attain power. Power could be resources, land, or allies, but power is all nations are concerned with. Now ask yourself, what does that mean for peace? It means our goal as peacemakers is to make it as easy as possible for nations to gain power without violence. You will never be able to make a nation stop lusting for power because power is what makes a nation a nation. That's where economic interdependence comes in. When we enact free trade policies, we make power the cost of war. If war does not bring the benefit of increased power, there is no longer a reason for a country to indulge itself in violence. We can sum up this problem in a simple statement. The wars of the world are born from protectionism, and the wounds of the world are healed by free trade. The problems of the world require cooperation to solve. Now, in conclusion, I have this to say. As citizens, we have a choice. Do we want to box ourselves in? Do we want to stick our fingers in our ears and ignore the outside world? Do we want to build walls to protect ourselves from our fellow humans? Or would we rather end conflict? Would we rather foster cooperation? Would you rather embrace the beauty of humanity? The question you must ask yourself before you make a decision for this debate is twofold. Are you ready to save the world? And are you ready to become an avenger? Thank you.
I thank the government whip for his speech. Now I'd like to call upon the opposition whip to end the debate. Tell us when you're ready.
Ladies and gentlemen, today's debate had three topics that we needed to talk about. First was the economy, right? What does economy has to do with peace and how does it help it? Second thing was we needed to talk about the developed country, how this trade, that free trade that happens in the developed country, how what is that the state and how that leads to peace. And the second, and I believe the most important part of today's debate, was the developing countries, the countries that are really in, some of them are in a state of conflict, tension with other countries that really need peace right now and that are really important to talk about. And I think are the theme of today's debate. Another point I believe was we needed to talk about the alternative and impracticality of free trade when it comes to the world, as the Prime Minister mentioned. Given the issues about Thanos and Avengers, I truly believe that the Avengers are there to restrict Thanos's freedom that is of killing other people. But we don't see anybody actually against that idea because of the fact that we think it's fair. That restriction, those rules that exist at that point of time is fair and is the way to actually help a society function. That is what we stand for. Our whole case today is not that we're against free trade in general, right? We believe that free trade sometimes may work to help peace, sometimes it may not, sometimes it might just be a neutral factor, but sometimes it definitely helps to increase the tensions and in some cases, war between other countries. Given that, let me come to the first flashpoint of today's debate. The economy and free trade in the developed countries. Poverty is being helped, that is related to the developing country, but I would come to that later in my second point. The example of China. Every time we actually implement free trade in its basic sense, that there is no discrimination against any product or anything, we see a tension rise between the United States and China in that over and over again. The fact is that when it comes to free trade, it's a competition, as the opponent mentioned. And in a competition, people don't like to lose, right? When you have deals between two countries and one of these countries is winning, right? Especially if they're continuously winning, it's a zero-sum game. That means it's the loss of the other country. And if they don't do something to stop that loss, it will result in them in the collapse at the worst case scenario, or it will hurt their economy and as a result, hurt their citizens. We believe that is not fair. Second, even in these developed countries, they give the examples of war happening because of economy and these restrictions that happen. That is not always true. The majority and the most important of wars that are happening is happening because of power, but do not confuse that with economy. They want the countries that are starting war, they want power for the reason that they believe in their ideology. Whether it was World War II, where some countries believed that they were superior when it came to other countries believed that they had to conquer the whole world because it was their responsibility to choose other people. It didn't have an economic basis for that. And free trade certainly would not have helped restrict, deter that war from happening. That's another point. Another point is culture, ladies and gentlemen, and this leads me to my talk about the developing countries. The Whip talked about Kiki and how, Drake came up with that song, right? But if I ask him, he would not know any songs from Afghanistan or any songs, or for example, the song that, I Saw On, for example, this is a song that's very important in this country. They would not know about that. Do you know why? Because there's a cultural element here in place. The United States and countries, especially English-speaking countries like Britain, have spent centuries exporting their culture, and in some cases actually attacking other people's culture in a sense through conquering, through colonialism and all of that. It created a rigged system there. Now, our songs are not as likely to sell in other countries as compared to even Kiki, where us Afghans are listening to that song. Because of this, we are not very likely to compete in this market of music. So other countries, for example, Japan, what they do is they try to limit the movie streaming in their country that's happening. It's sometimes restricted to 10 movies because of the fact that if it's more than that, right, not only would it influence their country, but it would hurt the movie industry in their own country. So that is very important, the cultural factor to preserve here. Coming to other points related to the developing countries, they're in a state of development. These countries, a lot of them are post-war countries, a lot of them in a state of economic instability. They have problems giving jobs to people. There are poverty, people are dying of hunger. The result of that is not the country buying advanced machinery from other countries in the world. They can make use of very simplistic machinery in that sense. The problem here is that these companies need time to develop their own economy, create jobs, have companies that actually export and their own products, as a result providing money to their own country. But they are deprived from that. Let me give you an example of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is in a trade with Pakistan, right? So a lot of problems. We created a cement company here. And the problem was that Pakistan just exported cement factories, exported their own cement here at an extremely low price, the price that we would never be able to compete with them, right? The government was not in most cases subsidizing them, but the factory made a cost-benefit analysis and decided if we reduce the cost now and accept the loss, in the long term, we will benefit. So the result of that was our country's cement factory went bankrupt. They had nothing to do anymore. And when that happened, that company increased the price of their own cement. So that is, as a result, people lost jobs here. And if you ask every citizen, if you ask them why they're poor, they're not going to be saying, well, we're really hopeful to seeing that cement country export more of their products because we're looking forward to that. The problem is they lost their jobs in the middle of that. And these companies, if they're allowed to do so, they would devour the other country's economy, right? It's a lose situation for the other country. It's like in a UFC fight, you're making a guy who weighs 200 pounds fight against a guy who weighs like 90 pounds. The guy will get killed, right, in that fight. So this is the problem we're seeing today. The third and the last point was the impracticality and alternative of this. This is impractical. No country has absolute free trade in their system. No country, absolutely any country in the world. And there's a reason for that. Some of these countries, when they're seeing that they're losing the fight, they turn towards rigging the economy and doing things, that help their own people. And it's quite moral in the cases that they're providing jobs for themselves. Furthermore, we have problems such as climate change, such as, products that children are being used to labor, like companies do that. A country should have the right to increase taxes on that product so it doesn't sell in their company, because the basis of those products was built on an immoral element. With that being said, we believe that, first of all, it's impractical. It doesn't help. It might help or might not help in the developed countries, but it does not absolutely help the developing countries when we're talking about economy. Thank you very much.
Matthew, do you want to take over the stage?
Let's. Okay. I just need one more religion. One more. I really like. I like it. Felt like I was betraying the whole. Yes.
All right. Thanks for a great debate. And I think, if I understand right, we have a couple judges on that side who are evaluating.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you need some time, or would you like to just kind of discuss for the audience?
We'll take 2-3 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. We're going to take 2 or 3 minutes, and we have our judge on our side, and he's also doing the same. So in the meantime, everyone just kind of sit tight, and then we'll finish up with the judges.
Yeah.
Top right.
Yeah.
We are done on our side of the judgment.
Excellent. Go ahead, and then I will follow. I'm the judge here at Kansas City.
Why don't you go ahead and announce your result first, and then we'll announce our result.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I can do that. First of all, my name is Isaac Allen. I'm the director of Debate Kansas City, one of the sponsors for this event. And I was really privileged to take a part of that. We have about 50 kids from our league. We do middle school and high school debate. They got to come and see this amazing event. And I'd just like to take another moment to say thank you to everybody who made this possible. And I hope we can do more of these in the future, because this was a really, really great debate. In evaluating today's debate, I thought that UMKC started the debate pretty strong, making arguments in favor of free trade. But as the arguments developed, I think I ended up siding with Kabul in this debate round for a couple of reasons. In the final speech, I really liked the cultural competency turn to the sort of Drake argument that's made in the last rebuttal. I don't think UMKC has an argument that goes beyond sort of the cultural elements, that those cultural elements are important. And also sort of the Thanos turn. Whenever you said that, restricting Thanos is important, that there are times and place for certain rules. But ultimately, what's pushed me on the side to voting for you all in Afghanistan was the argument that free trade is really non-existent. We can't point to a space where we have complete free trade, and that sometimes for the interest of your own people or for the interest of developing countries, you have to create restrictions so that those industries can develop, that protecting those industries is more important than letting the United States or China beat up on developing countries. So I think the developing countries turn was pretty smart, carried through every speech, and ultimately what decided the debate in your favor. I'm happy to answer any questions. Or does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. I am Ali Juma, and I'm the former debate club president. I and Zarif on this side of the house, we on this side of the spectrum of internet. on this side of the line, we were judging. So based on what we have decided, we believe that considering the fact that there was more evidence and more analysis from the government side, and then I really liked the speech from the whip who gave us pretty much how rules and regulations kind of most of the times make situations worse. And based on that, I believe that we gave on our side of the house win to Kansas University debate. Yeah. It shouldn't be just limited to this debate. I believe our debaters on this side of the cable, we really need help in order to improve debating community in Afghanistan as a whole and raise the bar of good debating in AUAf, in American University of Afghanistan. So I believe if we are in the future, Abdul Rahman Aziz here, the whip speaker from the opposition side of the house, he currently the president of the debate club here. I believe it would be great if he was in continuous contact with the president of the club, the debate club on your end. And we have more of such debates. I believe in today's debate, the win and the lose was not extremely important. And it was just like the example that Rahman said, it was a game between a guy who weighs 200 pounds and a guy who weighs 90 pounds. So yeah, we really learned a lot from your speeches. We really learned a lot from how you formulate your arguments, how you formulate your evidences within your speeches, and specifically how fluent you are when you speak. So I believe our debaters can learn a lot from that. And if we have continuous debates, we will be the people who will benefit a lot from it. Thank you so much once again for putting out time and making this debate happen. Yeah, if you have any questions, we are happy to answer.
Well, we'd just like to extend a last thank you to you all as well. We definitely want to stay in contact and keep developing this. This is, I've been in debate now for about 20 years. It's my first international debate. So it was very, very enlightening. And I have to say, since you all came prepared for the opposite side, you all were very, very impressive. Being able to take that and run with it, I think that was pretty amazing. So you all should be applauded for that amazing job.
Thank the Kansas University and City and the debaters that they have done a great job, very good solid points and fluent argument and points and good researches that they have done. So it's very good and it was very impressive to me. And so we are looking forward to more and more of these kind of debates. So as Ali John said that our community would benefit a lot from this debating culture. So it's a very great experience for us at the American University of Afghanistan and in larger context to overall Afghanistan. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So, all right. Good deal.
You guys have a nice day.
You too.
Good night.
Bye.
Hey, Rick, thank you for making this happen.
Yes, thank you so much for the organizers. Thank you.
So in the room.
And that wraps it up.